My brother Robert came to visit me from Mexico and found my house empty, completely empty. No furniture, no food in the pantry, nothing. He looked at me with his eyes full of tears and asked, "Sister, why are you starving when you have a retirement of $8,000 a month?" Before I could answer, Frank came out of his room, crossed his arms, and declared with a proud smile, "I give all her money to my wife. She manages it better than Mom." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert stood motionless, staring at my son as if he were a stranger. Then, very slowly, he took off his coat, folded it calmly, and what he did next left Frank completely paralyzed. But to understand how we got to that moment, I have to tell you my story from the beginning. My name is Veronica, and I am 69 years old. All my life I worked as a nurse at the City General Hospital. It was 42 years of night shifts, of emergencies that kept me awake, of patients who cried in my arms. 42 years giving my life to save other lives. My husband Richard died 11 years ago of a massive heart attack. It was so sudden that there was no time for goodbyes. That morning, before leaving for work, he gave me a kiss on the forehead and said, "I love you, Vero." I never imagined those would be his last words. The pain of losing him was so deep I thought I wouldn't survive. But I had a reason to keep going. Frank, our only son. He became the center of my universe. Everything I did, every extra hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for him, so he could have a good education, so he wouldn't lack anything, so he could fulfill his dreams. Frank grew up to be a happy and affectionate boy. I remember when he was 8 years old, he would wait up for me after my night shifts to give me a hug. "Mommy, you're the best nurse in the world," he would tell me with that sweet voice that melted my heart. He graduated from college with honors. He studied business administration, and I was so proud of him. I attended his graduation ceremony in my hospital uniform because I came straight from an 18-hour shift. But I didn't care. Seeing my son receive that diploma was my greatest reward. Afterward, he got a good job at a logistics company. Everything seemed perfect. My son was a successful, responsible man with a future. Or at least that's what I thought. 3 years ago, Frank met Diane at a business conference. She worked in the marketing department of a competing company. She was an elegant woman, always impeccably dressed, with that kind of confidence that commands respect. When Frank introduced her to me, I noticed something in her eyes I couldn't decipher at the time, a calculating coldness behind her perfect smile. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Veronica," she said in a soft voice, extending her hand. "Frank has told me a lot about you." She was wearing an ivory-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly nursing salary. I tried to be nice, to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, she was the woman who had won my son's heart. They got married 6 months later in a small but elegant ceremony. I paid for half of the wedding with my savings because I wanted Frank to have the special day he deserved. Diane had no close family. She said her parents had passed away and she was an only child. I felt sorry for her. I thought maybe her coldness was just a shield to protect herself from loneliness. I tried to get closer, to be the mother she never had. The first few months they seemed happy. Frank came to visit me every week. Sometimes he brought Diane. We shared Sunday lunch and he would tell me about his work, his plans, his dreams. "Mom, I'm going to give you grandchildren soon," he promised me one afternoon while helping me wash the dishes. "And you'll be the most spoiling grandma in the world." My heart filled with hope. Life was moving forward, and I had so much to live for. But then, 14 months ago, everything changed. Frank lost his job. The company where he worked closed operations in our city and moved everything to another region. He came to my house that afternoon with a devastated look on his face, his eyes red from crying. "Mom, I got fired," he told me with a broken voice. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I have debts, the apartment rent, Diane's expenses." I hugged him like when he was a child and told him, "It's okay, my love. I'm here. We're going to get through this together." And that's how my ordeal began. Although at the time, I called it a mother's love. Frank and Diane moved into my house 2 weeks after he lost his job. "It'll just be temporary, Mom," Frank assured me as they brought in their suitcases, "until I find another job and we can get back on our feet." I was happy to help them. After all, what was my $8,000 monthly retirement for if not to support my son in difficult times? My house had 3 bedrooms, so there was enough space. I gave them the master bedroom, the one that had been mine and Richard's. I moved into the smallest one. "You're young and need space," I told them with a smile. Diane thanked me with a kiss on the cheek, but there was something in that gesture that felt empty, mechanical, as if she were performing for an invisible audience. The first few days were pleasant. We cooked together. I taught Diane some traditional recipes that Frank had loved since he was a child. She seemed interested, took notes, asked me questions. "Mrs. Veronica, you are so generous," she would say while stirring the pot. "Not every mother would do what you do for her son." Those words filled me with pride. I thought we were finally building a mother-daughter relationship. But there were little details that started to make me uncomfortable. Diane would check the kitchen cabinets and make comments about what was missing. "We should buy new dishes. These are very old," she'd say, pointing to the plates Richard had given me for our 10th anniversary. Or she would enter my room without knocking, saying she needed something from the closet that they had left there by mistake. Frank spent his days sending out resumes and going to interviews. I gave him money for gas, for him to dress well, so he could buy a coffee while he waited. "Thanks, Mom," he'd say, taking the bills. "I promise I'll pay you back everything when I find a job." Weeks went by, and the interviews didn't pan out. Frank's frustration was evident. He came home quieter each day, more distant. Diane became the one who spoke for both of them. "Mrs. Veronica, Frank is very stressed," she explained to me in a soft voice. "The constant rejection is affecting him emotionally. He needs to feel that he can still provide for his family." Then she suggested something that seemed reasonable to me at the time. "Why don't you give Frank your debit card? That way he can manage the household expenses and feel useful while he looks for a job." I hesitated for a moment. It was my money, my retirement earned with 42 years of work. But I looked at my son sitting on the sofa with a lost gaze, and my heart broke. I wanted to help him regain his dignity. "Okay," I finally said. "Frank can manage the money while he's here." I gave him my card and explained my PIN. "Use what you need, son, for food, for your expenses, for whatever." Frank hugged me tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a smile on his face. "Thanks, Mom. You don't know what this means to me." Diane smiled too, but her smile was different. There was a glint in her eyes that I couldn't interpret then. Now I know it was the glint of victory. The first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Frank went to the supermarket and brought home the groceries. He paid the house bills on time. He even gave me $100 for my personal expenses. "Here, Mom, so you can buy yourself something nice," he said with affection. I felt relieved. My son was responsible. He was handling the money well. But then the subtle changes began. The supermarket purchases started to get smaller. "Everything is very expensive, Mom," Frank explained. "We have to economize until I get a job." It made sense, so I didn't question it. We stopped buying fresh meat and fish. Fruits disappeared from the pantry. "Canned vegetables are cheaper and last longer," Diane would say while preparing dinner. I nodded, trying to be understanding of the situation, but something strange was happening. While we ate beans and rice, Diane always had bags from expensive stores in her room. One day I saw her trying on an emerald-colored dress that surely cost several $100s. "A friend gave it to me," she said quickly when she noticed me watching. It didn't fit her anymore, and she knew it was my size. Frank also started wearing new clothes, shoes that shined, brand-name shirts, a watch I didn't remember seeing on him before. "A friend lent them to me for interviews," he explained when I asked. "You have to look good to get a job." His explanations always sounded logical, reasonable. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. 3 months passed and Frank still hadn't found a job. One day I tried to check my bank account online to see how much money was left, but the password had been changed. "Frank?" I called. He came into the living room with a calm expression. "Oh, yes. Mom, I changed the password for security. There's a lot of fraud now." He gave me a new password, but when I tried to use it, it didn't work either. "Let me, Mom," he said, taking my phone from my hands. "You don't really understand these technology things. I'll take care of it." And just like that, slowly, I lost access to my own money, to my own life. The following months were like falling into a dark pit I couldn't get out of. Every day was a little worse than the last, but the changes were so gradual that I didn't realize how deep I had fallen until it was too late. Frank and Diane had completely taken over my house, my money, my life, and I, like a fool, kept justifying every single one of their actions because they were my family, because Frank was my son, because a mother's love knows no bounds, right? But I was about to discover that some loves destroy you while you smile and say thank you. One day, I came into the living room and noticed the sofa was missing, the beautiful wine-colored velvet sofa that Richard and I had bought on our 20th anniversary. "Where's the sofa?" I asked. Confused, Diane was painting her nails at the dining table. She didn't even look up. "We sold it," she replied matter-of-factly. "It was very old and worn out. Besides, we needed the money for more important things." My heart started to race. More important things. What things? Frank appeared from the kitchen with a beer in his hand. "Mom, don't worry about those details. I'm taking care of everything." But I was worried. That sofa held memories, history, meaning. "Frank, that sofa belonged to your father and me. You had no right to sell it without consulting me." My son looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Cold, distant. "Mom, you're living in the past. It's just material things. Dad is gone and clinging to old furniture isn't going to bring him back." His words hurt me more than a slap. I tried to protest, but Diane intervened with a sugary voice. "Mrs. Veronica, Frank is right. You need to let go of the past and think about the future. Besides, we live here too, and we have a right to make decisions about the home." A right. In my own house, I wanted to scream at them that it was my house, my money, my memories, but the words got stuck in my throat. I was afraid. Afraid that if I confronted them, they would leave, and I would be completely alone, and loneliness terrified me more than anything in the world. So I swallowed my tears, nodded, and went to my room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The following week, the dining table disappeared. Then the antique lamps I had inherited from my mother, then the living room TV. Although, strangely, they had a new big-screen TV in their room. "I got it on sale," Frank explained when I asked. Every time I objected to something, the answer was the same. "Mom, trust me. I know what I'm doing." But I didn't trust him anymore. I started having nightmares where my house was completely empty, and I was walking through rooms that echoed with every step. The worst part is that those nightmares were becoming a reality. My diet also worsened drastically. The food portions became smaller and smaller. "Mom, at your age, you don't need to eat so much," Diane would tell me as she served me barely half a cup of rice and a few watery beans. "Besides, didn't you want to lose weight? I'm doing you a favor." I didn't want to lose weight. I was at a healthy weight for my age and build. But Frank supported his wife in everything. Diane studied nutrition in an online course. He informed me with pride. "She knows what's best for you." She hadn't studied nutrition. I would find that out later. It was just another lie in a growing mountain of lies. While I ate rice and beans once a day, they ordered takeout almost every night. The smell of pizza, burgers, Chinese food filled the house and made my stomach ache with hunger. It's just that we're younger and need more energy. Diane would explain without the slightest trace of shame on her face. I started to lose weight rapidly. My clothes were baggy on me. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the emaciated woman looking back at me. I had deep, dark circles, pale skin, trembling hands. My friends from the hospital, the few who still visited, were worried. "Veronica, are you sick?" Stella, my best friend for 30 years, asked me. "You look very thin. Are you eating well?" I opened my mouth to tell her the truth, to ask for help, but at that moment, Diane entered the living room with a radiant smile. "Mrs. Veronica is perfectly fine. She's just on a healthy diet." "Right, Mom." She looked at me with eyes that promised consequences if I said anything different. I nodded weakly. "Yes, I'm fine. Just taking care of myself." Stella didn't seem convinced. But she didn't press. When she left, I felt more alone than ever. One day I tried to withdraw money from the ATM with the card Frank had given back to me for emergencies. I needed to buy my blood pressure medication. The machine rejected the transaction. Insufficient funds. Impossible. It was the middle of the month. There should have been at least $4,000 in the account. I tried again. The same message. With trembling hands, I requested the printed balance. The number on the paper took my breath away. $37.50. $37 from a monthly pension of $8,000. Where was the rest? I got home with the crumpled paper in my hand and looked for Frank. He was on the patio talking on the phone, laughing about something. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call. "Frank, I need to talk to you," I said with a trembling voice, showing him the paper from the bank. "There are only $37 left in my account. Where is my money?" His expression changed from surprise to annoyance in a second. "Mom, did you go to the bank without telling me? We already talked about this. I managed the money so you don't have to worry." "But I need to know where it is. It's $8,000 and there are only 37 left. What was it all spent on?" Frank sighed as if he were dealing with a capricious child. "On food, on bills, on house expenses. Do you think everything is free electricity? Water, gas, internet? Everything costs money? Mom, but that couldn't cost almost $8,000. The utility bills add up to $500 a month at most. What about the other $7,500? Frank, the bills don't add up to more than $500. I insisted, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding. "Where are the other $7,500? My son looked at me with an expression of annoyance that chilled my blood. "Mom, we also have to pay for food, gas to go to interviews, clothes to look presentable. Or do you want me to go looking for work in rags?" His tone was defensive, almost aggressive. He had never spoken to me like that. "But son, I'm not seeing that food. We barely have rice and beans in the house. And you've been here for 6 months without finding a job. Don't you think it's time we look for another solution?" The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. I saw Frank's face darken. Diane appeared at that moment, as if she had been listening behind the door. "Another solution?" Diane repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "What are you implying? Mrs. Veronica, that you want to throw us out on the street, your own son?" Her words sounded hurt, but her eyes sparkled with something darker. Malice, calculation. "No, that's not it." I hurried to explain. "I just want to understand what's happening with my money. I have a right to know." Frank took a step toward me. "You have a right," he said slowly. "But you also have an obligation to help your family. Or are we not your family anymore? After everything I did for you, after taking care of you when Dad died, now you're going to deny me your support." His argument was absurd. He hadn't taken care of me when Richard died. I had been the one who took care of myself, who worked double shifts to not think about the pain, who kept going because I had to be strong. But I said nothing. I just stood there, holding that bank slip as if it were evidence in a trial where I was the accused. "Frank is right," Diane added, moving closer to her husband and taking his arm. "You are being selfish, Mrs. Veronica. We are going through a difficult time, and instead of supporting us, you are questioning us. Do you know what that does to Frank? You are hurting him emotionally." The word selfish echoed in my head like a bell. Me, selfish I, who had given my entire life to my son, who paid for his college, who supported him in every decision, who opened my home and gave him full access to my money. I was the selfish one. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to. I'm just confused." Frank sighed and patted me on the shoulder, like you comfort a dog. "It's okay, Mom. I know you're old, and it's hard for you to understand how things work now. That's why it's better for me to handle everything. You just rest, and don't worry about the money." I went to my room feeling small, ashamed, guilty. They had made me feel like I was the problem. The following weeks were even worse. I realized I no longer had control over anything in my own life. I couldn't access my bank account. I couldn't buy even a pack of cookies without asking for permission. Frank controlled every penny. One day I asked him for $20 to buy a birthday present for Stella. $20. He repeated as if I had asked for a fortune. "Mom, we don't have money for unnecessary expenses. Stella will understand." But it wasn't unnecessary for me. Stella had been my friend for 30 years. She had been by my side when Richard died. She deserved at least a birthday present. "Please. Frank, just $20. My son looked at me with that fed-up expression that was becoming more and more frequent. "No, Mom. And don't insist because you're stressing me out. Do you know how hard it is for me to be without a job? And on top of that, I have to deal with your whims." I stopped seeing my friends, not because I didn't want to, but because I was ashamed for them to see me like this, thin, emaciated, without a penny in my pocket. What was I going to tell them that my own son had taken everything from me when Stella called? I made excuses. "I'm tired. I don't feel well. Some other time." Eventually, she stopped calling as much. I was isolating myself from the world, and I didn't even realize it was exactly what Frank and Diane wanted. A victim without witnesses is easier to control. The house was getting emptier and emptier. The framed photographs disappeared from the walls. "I sold them on an app," Diane explained. "Old frames are in fashion, and they paid well." They were photos of my wedding, Frank's baptism, family Christmases, irreplaceable memories reduced to cash that I never saw. They took the Persian rugs I had inherited from my grandmother. They were full of dust mites. That was the excuse. The paintings Richard had painted as a hobby. They took up too much space. Every object that disappeared took a piece of my history, of my identity with it. I was being erased from my own life, one object at a time. My health was visibly deteriorating. Besides the weight loss, I started having constant dizzy spells. My blood pressure medication had run out weeks ago, and I had no money to buy more. "Frank, I need to go to the doctor," I told him one morning after nearly fainting in the bathroom. "I feel very weak." My son didn't even look up from his cell phone. "Doctors are very expensive, Mom. Besides, you're a nurse. You can take care of yourself." It was twisted logic. Yes, I was a nurse, but I was retired and sick. I needed professional medical attention, but my medication, I tried to explain. "I already told you there's no money for that." He cut me off with a final tone. "Learn to manage better." Manage, I didn't have access to a single cent. How was I supposed to manage what I didn't have? One night, I woke up with my stomach twisting in hunger. I hadn't eaten anything all day except a bit of stale bread in the morning. I got up and went to the kitchen hoping to find something, anything. The pantry was practically empty. There was only one can of tuna and a pack of crackers. I took the can with trembling hands and looked for the can opener. I was about to open it when I heard Diane's voice behind me. "What are you doing?" I jumped so hard I almost dropped the can. "I'm hungry," I said in a barely audible voice. Diane took the can from my hands. "This is for Frank's lunch tomorrow. He needs protein to stay strong for his interviews. You already had dinner." But I hadn't had dinner. They had ordered Chinese food and hadn't offered me anything. I just stood there, watching as Diane put the can on a high shelf where I couldn't reach, and I felt like a prisoner in my own home, because that's exactly what I was. A prisoner. The days turned into a fog of hunger, weakness, and despair. I lost track of time. How long had Frank and Diane been living with me, Tiktwats? 8 a year, I didn't know. Everything blended together in my mind, confused by malnutrition. The only thing I knew for sure was that I was losing the will to fight. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a useless old woman who didn't understand how the modern world worked. Maybe I deserved this. Those dark thoughts took over me more and more frequently. I was giving up on myself. But then, something happened that would change everything. My brother Robert decided to pay me a surprise visit from Mexico. Robert and I had always been close despite the distance. He had moved to Mexico City 15 years ago for work and had built his life there. But we always kept in touch. We talked on the phone at least once a month, although I must admit that in recent months I had been avoiding his calls. I didn't want him to hear my weak voice, to ask me questions I didn't know how to answer. When I didn't answer, he would leave messages. "Sister, are you okay? You have me worried. Call me." But I never returned the calls. Frank was always nearby, listening, controlling. I didn't dare say anything that might upset him. Robert tried to contact Frank directly. "Your uncle is asking about you," my son would tell me in a bored tone after hanging up. "I told him you're fine, just busy." But Robert wasn't stupid. My younger brother, 5 years younger than me, had always been perceptive. He worked as an accountant for an important company and had that ability to detect when the numbers didn't add up, and something in this whole situation wasn't adding up to him. After 2 months of not being able to speak with me directly, Robert made a decision, without telling anyone. He bought a plane ticket and came to visit me. When he knocked on the door that Thursday afternoon, I was lying in my room, too weak to get up. Frank opened the door and found him standing there, with a small suitcase and a determined expression. "Uncle Robert," I heard Frank's surprised voice from the living room. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my sister," Robert replied in a firm voice. "She's home." There was an uncomfortable silence. I wanted to get up, go greet him, but my body wouldn't respond. I had spent 3 days eating practically nothing, and the dizzy spells were constant. "Yes, she's here, but she's resting," Frank said. "She's been a little delicate lately." Then, "Perfect. I came at the right time," Robert replied, and I heard his footsteps entering the house. "Which room is she in?" Frank tried to stop him, but my brother was already walking down the hallway, opening doors. When he opened my bedroom door and saw me, his face completely transformed. I saw the shock, the horror, the disbelief in his eyes. "Veronica," he whispered as if he couldn't believe the skeletal woman lying on that bed was his sister. I sat up with difficulty. "Robert." I tried to smile. What a surprise. But my voice came out broken, barely a whisper. My brother entered the room and knelt beside my bed. He took my hand and I could see his eyes fill with tears as he felt how thin I was, how fragile my bones were under my skin. "My God, sister, what happened to you?" he asked with a trembling voice. You're malnourished. You look—" He didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what he was going to say. I looked like a terminal patient. I looked like someone on the verge of death. "I'm fine," I lied out of reflex. "I've just been a little sick." Robert shook his head slowly, without letting go of my hand. "No, Veronica, this isn't being a little sick. This is serious. Very serious." He stood up and left the room. I followed him with my eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and terror. Robert had come. Someone had finally come. My brother walked through the house, and I could hear his steps, his muffled exclamations of surprise. When he returned to my room, his expression was one of complete disbelief. "Veronica, where is your furniture? Your house is practically empty. There's no sofa in the living room, no table in the dining room. The walls are bare. What happened here?" Frank appeared in the doorway with Diane stuck to his side. "Uncle, we're in the middle of a renovation," he explained in that smooth voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "We sold some old furniture to buy more modern things later." Robert turned to him with a look I had never seen. "Renovation. Your mother is lying on a bare mattress in a room with no heat, and you call this a renovation." It was true. My bed only had a mattress with a thin blanket. I didn't even have a pillow. I had been sleeping with a rolled-up towel under my head. "Uncle, you're exaggerating," Frank said, but his voice sounded less confident. Robert ignored him. He turned back to me. "Sister, when was the last time you ate?" The question took me by surprise. "Me, this morning." I lied. But Robert knew me too well. He walked to the kitchen and I heard him open the pantry, the refrigerator. He returned, his face flushed with contained anger. "There is no food in this house, Veronica. Absolutely nothing. Just one can of tuna and a pack of expired crackers. How have you been eating?" I couldn't answer. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. Robert knelt beside me again, and in a very soft voice, as if he were talking to someone wounded, he asked, "Sister, why are you starving? You have a retirement of $8,000 a month. You should be living comfortably. Where is your money?" Before I could answer, Frank came out of his room. He must have been listening to the whole conversation. He crossed his arms, and with an expression that mixed pride and defiance, he declared loudly and clearly, "I give all her money to my wife. She manages it better than Mom. Mom is old and doesn't understand modern finances. Diane has an investment plan to grow that money. It's for everyone's good." The silence that followed was absolute. Robert stood completely still, staring at Frank as if he had just confessed a crime. I felt as if cold water had been thrown on me. My son had admitted, with pride, that he was taking all my money. Diane appeared next to Frank, taking his arm with a satisfied expression. "It's true, Robert. I am investing Mrs. Veronica's money intelligently. She gave it to us voluntarily for us to manage." Robert stood up very slowly. I saw his jaw tighten, how his hands clenched into fists. But when he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. "So, you give all her money to your wife," he repeated, looking Frank straight in the eye. "And your mother is here, starving to death in her own home, while you and your wife keep her entire pension. It's not like it sounds, Uncle," Frank started to say, but Robert held up a hand to silence him. "Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses." He turned to Diane. "And you say you're investing my sister's money. In what exactly?" "Because from what I see, it's not in food, it's not in medicine, it's not in keeping this house in decent condition." Diane opened her mouth to answer, but Robert continued. "In fact, I want to see these supposed investments. I want to see account statements, documents, proof of where every cent of the $8,000 a month my sister receives is, and I want to see them now." Frank and Diane exchanged a quick glance, and in that moment, I knew the truth. There were no investments. There was no financial plan. There was only theft, abuse, and manipulation. My brother knew it too. I saw his expression change from controlled anger to something much colder and more calculated. Robert took off his coat very slowly, folded it carefully, and placed it on my bed. Then he took his cell phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. "Henry," he said when someone answered, "It's Robert. I need you to come to my sister Veronica's house immediately. Bring your recorder and your camera, and if you can, bring a doctor too." Henry was our family's lawyer, and had been for years, a serious, meticulous man who had handled our parents' will and some legal matters for me and Robert. I saw Frank turn pale. "Uncle, what are you doing?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. "This is a private family matter." Robert finished the call and turned to Frank with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're right, Frank. It is a family matter, a very serious family matter called elder financial abuse, and when Henry gets here, we are going to document every cent you have stolen, every piece of furniture you have sold, every meal you denied your mother, everything." The word stolen hung in the air like an accusation. Frank tried to protest. Diane tried to explain, but Robert wasn't listening anymore. He sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. "Sister," he said in a soft voice, "this is over. It all ends today." Frank started pacing the room, running his hands through his hair nervously. "Uncle Robert, I think you're misinterpreting the whole situation," he said in a shaky voice. "Mom gave us permission to manage her money. She wanted to help us. Tell him, Mom, tell him you agreed to everything." All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of that moment, the importance of what I was about to say. For months I had justified. I had forgiven. I had stayed silent. But as I looked at my son's pleading eyes and then at my brother's firm, loving eyes, something broke inside me, something I had been holding back for too long. "I gave you my card for temporary expenses," I said, my voice weak but clear. "I didn't give you permission to empty my account every month. I didn't give you permission to sell my furniture. I didn't give you permission to let me starve to death in my own home." The words came out like a flood. I could no longer stop. "I gave you my card because you were my son, and you were in trouble, because I trusted you, because I never imagined you would do this to me." My voice broke, but I continued. "I changed my whole life for you. Frank, I worked double shifts to pay for your college. I gave up having a social life to be with you when you were a child. I gave you everything I had, everything I was, and you repaid me by stealing my dignity." Frank opened his mouth, but no words came out. Diane stepped forward. "Mrs. Veronica, you're confused. Age sometimes makes us remember things incorrectly." But Robert cut her off with a sharp voice. "Don't treat her like she's senile. My sister is perfectly lucid, and you just heard her testimony." Robert stood up and walked toward Frank. "While we wait for Henry, let's do a little exercise. You say Diane is investing your mother's money. Fine, show me. Open your phone and show me the investment apps, the statements, the certificates, whatever." Frank took a step back. "I don't have to show you anything. You're not the police." "You're right. I'm not the police," Robert replied with chilling calm. "But they will be here soon if you don't cooperate, because what you have done to your mother is not just immoral. It's illegal. It's called financial exploitation of the elderly, and it's a federal crime with penalties of up to 10 years in prison." I saw the color drain completely from Frank's face. Diane, on the other hand, maintained her composure, although I could see a flicker of panic in her eyes. "This is ridiculous," Diane said in a tense voice. "We haven't committed any crime. Frank is Mrs. Veronica's son. Children have a right to receive help from their parents." "Help? Yes," Robert replied. "Theft? No. There's a very clear difference between asking for help and taking every cent your mother-in-law receives while leaving her without food and medicine." He turned to me. "Sister, when was the last time you took your blood pressure medication?" "Almost 2 months ago," I admitted. "Frank said there was no money to buy it." Robert closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was holding back an explosion of fury. "There was no money for medicine that costs $30 a month, but there was money for—" He looked around the empty room. "For what? Exactly. Where is the money?" "Frank." My son slid to the floor, sitting against the wall with his hands covering his face. "We spent it," he mumbled. "You spent it," Robert repeated. $8,000 a month for how many months?" "Veronica." 14 months, I replied. They've lived here for 14 months. Robert took out his phone and quickly did the math. $112,000. You spent $112,000 of your mother's money in 14 months. On what? Frank didn't answer. It was Diane who spoke. And for the first time since I'd known her, her voice sounded genuinely scared. We had expenses. The rent for the apartment we still had the first year, credit card debts, the car. What apartment? Robert asked. Frank and Diane live here. We're still paying the lease on the old apartment, Diane explained quickly. We moved out before the lease ended, and we had to keep paying until it expired. Robert looked at her in disbelief. And it didn't occur to you to sublet to find someone to take the space, or was it just more convenient to use my sister's money to pay for 2 homes while she slept on a bare mattress? Diane had no answer for that. The credit card debts, Robert continued. How much are we talking about? $20,000, Frank mumbled from the floor. $20,000. Robert repeated. And how did you accumulate $20,000 in debt? The silence was the answer. But I knew the answer. I had seen it with my own eyes over these months. The expensive clothes they wore, the expensive restaurants they brought leftovers from, Frank's new watch shining on his wrist, the designer handbags Diane collected, the weekend trips they took while I stayed home alone. All of it had been with my money. The doorbell rang and Robert went to open it. Henry entered with his professional briefcase and a serious expression. He was a man in his 50s, gray-haired, with glasses, and that calm but authoritative presence that good lawyers have. Behind him came a woman I didn't recognize, carrying a medical bag. "Veronica," Henry said, approaching my bed with obvious concern. Robert explained a bit over the phone. But, my God. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My appearance spoke for itself. The doctor, who introduced herself as Dr. Sonia, approached and began to examine me. She took my blood pressure, listened to my heart, checked my eyes and mouth. Her expression grew more serious with each passing second. "Mrs. Veronica, you are severely malnourished," she said in a professional but worried voice. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high. You have signs of dehydration, and your body mass index indicates severe malnutrition. You need immediate medical attention." "Did you hear that?" Robert said, looking at Frank and Diane. "Severe malnutrition in a house where $8,000 comes in every month." Henry took a recorder out of his briefcase. "With your permission, Veronica, I'm going to record this conversation. It's important to document everything that has happened." I nodded weakly. Henry turned on the recorder and began. "It is Thursday, February 22nd, at 4:30 p.m. Present at the residence of Mrs. Veronica are Mrs. Veronica, her brother Robert, her son Frank, her daughter-in-law Diane, attorney Henry Mendoza, and Dr. Sonia Ramirez." He looked at Frank and Diane. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and I strongly recommend you answer honestly. Everything you say will be recorded and can be used in future legal proceedings." Frank stood up, trembling. We didn't do anything wrong. My mother gave us her money voluntarily." "Voluntarily?" Henry asked in a skeptical tone. "Did you ask your mother if she agreed to go without food, without medicine, without furniture?" "She could ask for whatever she needed," Diane chimed in defensively. "It's not our fault if she didn't ask." "She didn't ask?" Robert's voice boomed like thunder. "My sister asked you for $20 to buy her best friend a birthday present, and Frank refused. She asked you for money for her medication, and you refused. How dare you say she didn't ask?" Henry raised a hand to calm things down. "Frank, Diane, I need you to hand over all bank statements for the last 14 months. I need to see exactly where every cent of the $112,000 you received from Veronica's pension went." "We don't have to give you anything," Frank said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Technically, no," Henry admitted. "But if you don't cooperate voluntarily, I will file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office tonight for elder financial abuse, misappropriation, and possibly fraud. And then it will be federal investigators reviewing your accounts, with a court order. And I assure you, they are much less kind than I am. I saw Frank and Diane look at each other, communicating silently. Finally, Diane sighed. Fine, we'll show you the statements. She took out her phone with trembling hands and began to open apps. Robert and Henry moved closer to see the screen. What they saw left them silent for a long moment. Then Robert whispered, "My God." "What? God." "What?" I asked weakly. "What did you see?" Robert turned to me with an expression of absolute disbelief. "Sister, there are transfers from your account to a business account in Diane Mendez's name. A business account. She opened a business with your money." Robert's words fell on me like stones. A business. Diane had opened a business with my money, my pension, earned with 42 years of work as a nurse, endless night shifts, patients I had cared for with my own hands. All that sacrifice had been used to finance the business of the woman who was starving me to death. "What kind of business?" Henry asked in a controlled voice as he took notes in a legal pad. Diane didn't answer. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor. Her previous confidence had completely vanished. It was Frank who spoke, his voice barely audible. "A clothing boutique. Diane always wanted to have her own store." "A boutique," Robert repeated slowly, as if processing something incomprehensible. "You left your mother without food, without medicine, without furniture, selling her family memories, so your wife could fulfill her dream of owning a clothing store." "It wasn't like that," Diane protested, looking up for the first time, her eyes shining with tears. "I was going to pay her back all the money when the business started making a profit. It was a temporary investment. An investment." Henry's voice was dangerously soft. "Did you ask Veronica for permission to invest her entire pension in your personal business?" Diane shook her head. "Frank said she would be okay with it, that she would understand." "Frank said," Henry repeated, writing meticulously, "but you never asked Veronica directly if you could use her money to open a business in your name." "No," Diane admitted in a broken voice. Henry turned to Frank. "And you? Did you tell your mother you were using her entire pension to finance your wife's business?" Frank didn't answer. His silence was all the answer we needed. Robert started reviewing more details on Diane's phone, swiping his finger across the screen with an increasingly dark expression. "Here's a $3,000 transfer for initial inventory, another for $2,500 for store renovation, $1,200 for logo and brand design, $4,000 for imported merchandise." With every figure he mentioned, I felt as if needles were being driven into my heart. "And here," Robert continued, "are personal purchases, an $800 dress, $600 shoes, a $200 handbag, dinners at restaurants that cost $200, $300 a night." He turned to Diane with a look of absolute contempt. "While my sister ate watery beans once a day, you spent $1,200 on a handbag." Diane began to cry openly. "I needed to look good for the business. Customers judge by appearances. If I didn't look successful, no one was going to buy from my store. And my mother," I asked in a voice I barely recognized as my own, a voice filled with a pain so deep it seemed to come from the center of the earth. "Didn't she need to look good? Didn't she need to eat? Didn't she need her medicine?" Diane couldn't look me in the eye. "I thought, Frank said you had savings, that you had other accounts." I laughed. It was a bitter, broken laugh that hurt my chest. Other savings. Where was I going to get other savings? I spent all my savings on Frank's college, on his wedding, on helping you when you needed it. My pension was all I had, and you knew it. Henry continued reviewing the phone, now with a tablet where he was doing calculations. According to what I'm seeing here, of the $1 to $12,000 that came into this house in 14 months, approximately $93,000 were transferred directly to Diane's accounts for her business and personal expenses. $93,000. The figure was so large I couldn't process it. "And the other $19,000?" Robert asked. Frank cleared his throat. "We paid for the old apartment for 6 months until the lease ended. That was about $1,500 a month. $9,000 in total. Then there are the credit card debts we had before we moved in here. We were paying them off slowly. Slowly. With my sister's money, while she was starving to death." Robert's voice trembled with contained anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have the slightest idea?" Dr. Sonia, who had been taking my vital signs again, intervened. "Mr. Robert, I need to take Mrs. Veronica to the hospital immediately. Her condition is critical. She needs IV hydration, supervised nutrition, and a full evaluation. If she doesn't receive urgent medical attention, she could suffer a collapse." "No," I said firmly, despite my weakness. All eyes turned to me. "I'm not going to the hospital until this is resolved. I need to hear everything. I need to know the whole truth." Robert knelt by my bed and took my hand. "Sister, you are very sick." "I know," I replied. "But I've been sick for months and I survived. I can hold on for a few more hours. I need to know what else they hid from me." My brother looked at Dr. Sonia, who nodded reluctantly. "All right, but no more than an hour. After that, I insist on taking her to the hospital, with or without her permission." Henry took more documents out of his briefcase. "Frank, Diane, I need you to sign a sworn affidavit admitting you received Veronica's pension money and how you spent it. This statement will be used to determine the next legal steps." "And if we don't sign?" Frank asked with a last attempt at defiance. "Then I will proceed immediately with the criminal complaint," Henry replied, emotionless. "And believe me, you will want to resolve this in the civil arena before it becomes a criminal case. Elder financial abuse is a federal crime. We're talking years in prison, not fines." I saw the color drain from Frank's face. Diane was sobbing uncontrollably. "We didn't want to hurt her," she cried. "We just wanted to get ahead. We just wanted a chance." "At my sister's expense," Robert asked in a harsh voice. "That was your chance to starve a 69-year-old woman." "Enough," I said, with more strength than I thought I had. "I want to ask questions." Everyone fell silent and looked at me. "Frank," my voice trembled, but I needed to know. "At any point, during these 14 months, did you stop to think about me when you saw me getting thinner, weaker, when you sold your father's sofa, when you denied me money for my medicine? Did you ever think, this is wrong? My son couldn't hold my gaze. Diane said it was temporary, that soon everything would be fine." "Diane said," I repeated. "Frank, you are my son. You've known me since the day you were born. I held you in my arms. I fed you when you were hungry. I took care of you when you were sick. And you couldn't see that I was hungry, that I was sick." Tears began to roll down Frank's face. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." "Are you sorry?" My voice rose despite my weakness. "Are you sorry you got caught? Or are you sorry you did this to me?" Frank dropped to his knees beside my bed. "I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't want to. Things got out of control. Every time I wanted to stop, Diane said just one more month, just a little more money, and then we could pay you back everything with interest." I turned to Diane. "And your boutique, is it working? Is it generating those profits you were going to use to pay me back?" Diane shook her head, sobbing. "It failed 2 months ago. It didn't work. I lost everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Robert was the one who spoke. "So, you didn't just steal $93,000 from my sister. You lost it. All that money, all that suffering, for nothing." Henry closed his legal pad with a dry snap. "All right, now that we have all the information, these are the next steps. Frank and Diane are going to sign an agreement acknowledging the $93,000 debt to Veronica. They will establish a payment plan that will be legally supervised. Furthermore, they are to vacate this house immediately." "Immediately?" Frank asked in a high-pitched voice. "Where are we going to go?" "That's not my problem," Henry replied coldly. "You should have thought of that before you stole from your mother. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave the property. If you don't do it voluntarily, I will call the police and have you forcibly removed." Frank looked at Robert, pleading. "Uncle, please, we're family." Robert looked at him with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It was deep disappointment, sadness, and something that looked like pity. "Family doesn't do this, Frank. What you did has no name." Frank tried to approach me, but Robert stepped between us. "No," my brother said in a firm voice. "You've done enough damage to her." My son stopped, his hands outstretched to me in a gesture of supplication. "Mom, please, forgive me. I love you. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still your son. You can't leave me on the street." His words should have moved me. For 69 years, Frank had been my reason for living, my purpose, my everything. But as I looked at him standing there, crying and begging, I felt something I never thought I would feel for my own son. Nothing. The love I had felt for him my entire life had evaporated, consumed by months of hunger, humiliation, and betrayal. "You let me starve in my own home," I said, my voice broken but firm. "I didn't leave you on the street. I gave you a roof, food, all my money, and you decided that my life was worth less than a clothing boutique." "Mom, I can fix this," Frank insisted desperately. "I'll get a job. I'll pay you back every cent. Just give me a chance." "A chance?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "I gave you 14 months of chances. Every day I woke up hungry. Every night I shivered from cold because you had sold my blankets. Every time I asked you for something and you refused. Those were opportunities for you to do the right thing, and you never did." Diane also approached, falling to her knees in front of me. "Mrs. Veronica, I know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, don't leave us with nothing. Frank won't survive on the street. He's your only son, your only family." "I am her family," Robert intervened in a harsh voice. "I am the one who came to save her when her only son was slowly killing her." He turned to Diane with contempt. "And you have no right to ask for anything. You orchestrated all of this. You convinced Frank to steal from his own mother to finance your business fantasies." "That's not true," Diane protested weakly. "Frank wanted the business too. He agreed to everything." Frank looked at her with an expression of betrayal. "What? No, you were the one who insisted on using my mother's money. You said it was just a loan, that she would never know because we were going to pay it back before she found out. You never stopped me." Diane shouted, getting to her feet. "You spent that money too. You also bought expensive clothes and ate at fancy restaurants while your mother was starving. And there it was, the ugly, naked truth. They were blaming each other, destroying their own marriage right before my eyes. A part of me should have felt satisfied watching their relationship fall apart, but I only felt a deep, painful emptiness. This was my son, the baby I had held in my arms, the boy who had told me I was the best mom in the world, the young man I had been so proud of. When had he turned into this stranger, capable of such cruel crimes? Henry slammed his fist on the table, silencing the argument. "Enough. I'm not interested in who had the idea or who is more to blame. You are both equally responsible under the law. Now, are you going to sign these documents, or am I going to call the police to decide?" He took several papers from his briefcase and placed them on the only table left in the room. Frank and Diane slowly approached, reading the documents with expressions of defeat. "This says we have to pay $500 a month until the full debt is covered." Frank read in a shaky voice, "That's over 5 years of payments. You should consider yourself lucky," Henry replied without sympathy. "The alternative is prison, And believe me, you won't be able to pay a cent in there. But I don't have a job. Pia. Frank protested. How am I going to pay $500 a month without a job? That's your problem, not mine, Henry said. You'll get a job, 2 jobs, if necessary. 3, I don't care. But you are going to pay back every cent you stole from your mother. Diane picked up the pen with a trembling hand. And if we can't pay 1 month, what happens then? Then the agreement is automatically voided and I proceed with criminal charges, Henry explained. This document is your only chance to avoid prison. I suggest you take it seriously. I watched as Diane and Frank exchanged looks of desperation. Finally, they both signed the documents. Henry reviewed them carefully, making sure every page was signed and dated correctly. Good, he said, putting the documents in his briefcase. Now, according to the terms you just signed, you have 2 hours to leave this property. You can take only your personal belongings. Nothing that belongs to Veronica. None of the furniture. Even if there are only 3 chairs and a table left. None of the appliances. Just your clothes and personal items. Frank looked around the almost empty house with a lost expression. Where are we going to go? You can go to friends, family, find a shelter, rent something. It's not my problem, Robert replied. You should have thought about that before. Diane began to walk toward her room, sobbing. Frank followed her with slow, defeated steps. As they packed, I heard their voices arguing in the room, blaming each other, crying. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but every time that feeling started to surface, I remembered the nights of hunger, the dizziness from lack of food, the humiliation of having to ask for $20 and being denied. I remembered watching them eat while my stomach growled. I remembered every little cruelty, every lie, every moment they chose their comfort over my survival. No, I didn't feel pity. I felt justice. Robert sat next to me and took my hand. Sister, when they leave, I'm taking you straight to the hospital. Dr. Sonia says you need at least a week of hospitalization to stabilize. I don't want to stay here afterward, I whispered. This house has too many bad memories now. I know, Robert replied in a soft voice. That's why, when you get out of the hospital, you're coming to live with me in Mexico City, at least temporarily, until you fully recover. Afterward, if you want to come back here, we'll renovate your house. We'll fill it with life again, but first, you need to heal. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. Thank you, Robert. If you hadn't come... He interrupted me. I will always be here for you. You're my sister. I should have come sooner. I should have insisted more when you didn't answer my calls. I feel guilty for not realizing what was happening. It's not your fault, I said, squeezing his hand. They were very careful. Every time I tried to ask for help, Frank was nearby. Every time someone called, he would answer and say I was fine. He isolated me completely. Henry, who had been reviewing more documents, looked up. Veronica, there's something else I need to tell you. When I reviewed the transfers in more detail, I found something disturbing. There are several documents that were digitally signed in your name. Authorizations for large transfers, changes to insurance beneficiaries, a power of attorney. My heart stopped. Power of attorney? I never signed any power of attorney. I know, Henry said with a grave expression. That's why I'm going to need you to file a formal complaint for document forgery. Frank forged your signature on several important legal documents. That's an additional crime, much more serious than financial abuse. What documents? I asked, feeling nauseous. A power of attorney that gave Frank total control over all your accounts and financial decisions. A change to your life insurance policy where Frank and Diane are now the sole beneficiaries instead of the distribution you previously had among Frank, Robert, and some charitable organizations, and an authorization to sell this house if it became necessary. The words hit me like hammer blows. They were going to sell my house. Henry nodded. There was a preliminary application with a real estate agency dated 3 weeks ago. They were preparing the ground to sell it. They were probably going to tell you it was necessary for some fabricated medical or financial emergency. I felt as if the entire world was collapsing around me. They hadn't just robbed me. They hadn't just starved me. They had planned to take everything. My house, my life insurance, my complete autonomy. They would have left me with literally nothing. "And how much would they have gotten for the house?" Robert asked, his voice trembling with contained fury. "According to the preliminary appraisal they requested, approximately $250,000, Henry replied. Robert shot to his feet so abruptly the chair fell backward. "Frank," he yelled, heading toward the room where my son was packing. Henry and I followed him. I leaned on the walls, because my legs could barely support me. Robert threw the door open and found Frank folding clothes into a suitcase. "You were going to sell your mother's house," Robert roared. "You were going to leave her literally on the street." Frank turned pale. We were just exploring options. We never would have done it without her permission." "Liar," Robert shouted. "You forged her signature on legal documents. You changed her life insurance, all without her knowledge or permission." Frank started to cry again, but these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of someone watching their world fall apart. "Uncle, please, I was desperate. Diane said we needed more capital to save the business. I thought if we sold the house, we could buy Mom something smaller and use the difference to invest. She was going to be better off. I swear." "Better off," I repeated in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "Better off homeless, without the house your father and I bought with so much sacrifice." I approached Frank. Each step was a monumental effort. "Look at what you did to me," I said, pointing to my emaciated body. "This is what it means to be better off, under your care. I weighed 132 pounds when you moved in. Now I weigh 92. You took 40 pounds from me, almost all my strength, my dignity, my will to live, and still, you plan to take more." Frank fell to his knees in front of me, crying uncontrollably. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I lost my way. I lost sight of what was important. Please, give me another chance. I can change." I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the broken man in front of me, but I also saw the boy he had been, the son I had loved with every fiber of my being, and in that instant, I made the hardest decision of my life. "No," I said, my voice firm despite the tears rolling down my cheeks. "I'm not going to give you another chance, not because I don't love you, Frank, but precisely because I love myself, and for the first time in my life, I'm going to choose me." I saw his eyes widen in shock, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "For 69 years, I put everyone else before myself. Your father, you, my patients, everyone. And when I needed someone to put me first the most, my own son chose money. He chose a clothing store. He chose his comfort over my life." "Mom, please," Frank begged, reaching his hands out to me. I took a step back. "No, it's over. You signed the documents. You're going to pay your debt. And after that, I don't want to see you again." The words came out of my mouth with a clarity that surprised me. Frank was paralyzed. "Never. You're never going to want to see me again." "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Maybe someday, when I've healed, when I can think of you without feeling this pain in my chest. But right now, every time I look at you, I see the months of suffering. I see every lie, every manipulation, every moment you chose to hurt me. I can't have that in my life, not if I want to survive." Robert came over and put his hand on my shoulder, giving me strength. "Sister, the doctor insists we must go to the hospital now." I nodded. "Yes, it's time." I turned one last time toward Frank and Diane. "You have 1 hour to leave. When I come back from the hospital, I don't want to find any trace of you here." Diane, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mrs. Veronica, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know. I'm going to spend the rest of my life regretting what I did. You didn't deserve any of this." I looked her straight in the eye. "You're right. I didn't. But it happened. And now you will both have to live with the consequences of your decisions, just as I will have to live with the scars you left me." Robert helped me walk to the door. Each step was an effort, but it also felt like a step toward freedom. Dr. Sonia was waiting for me in the living room with a wheelchair. "It's better if you don't walk anymore for now," she said with gentle professionalism. I sat in the chair, feeling how fragile my body had become. As Robert pushed me toward the exit, I heard Frank's sobs behind me. I didn't look back. If I looked back, maybe I would break. And I had been broken enough. The hospital was a whirlwind of exams, blood tests, IV drips, and concerned doctors. I was hospitalized immediately in intensive care. My blood pressure was dangerously high. My kidneys showed signs of damage from prolonged dehydration. I had severe anemia and critical vitamin deficiencies. "Mrs. Veronica," the doctor in charge told me, a man in his 40s with a grave expression. "You arrived just in time. 1 or 2 more weeks in those conditions, and you likely would have suffered multiple organ failure." The words hit me hard. I had been so close to death, so close, and my own son had been the one to lead me to that edge. I spent 9 days in the hospital. Robert was with me every day, bringing me flowers, reading me books, or just holding my hand when the nightmares woke me up in the middle of the night. Stella came to visit me, crying when she saw my condition. "Veronica, I should have insisted more," she said through her tears. "I saw something was wrong, but I didn't push hard enough. It's not your fault. It's not your," I assured her. "They were very careful. They isolated me systematically, but I'm free now." During those days in the hospital, Henry worked tirelessly on my case. He filed a formal complaint for elder financial abuse, document forgery, and misappropriation. He also began the process to reverse all the forged documents, the power of attorney, the change to my life insurance, everything. "There's good news," he told me during one of his visits. "The bank is cooperating completely. They are going to review every suspicious transaction from the last 14 months, and since we found evidence of signature forgery, we might be able to recover some of the stolen money." "How much?" I asked without much hope. "It's hard to say. Maybe $20,000 or $30,000. The rest was spent in cash or on the business that already failed. But something is better than nothing." Robert took care of my house while I was hospitalized. He hired a deep cleaning crew, bought new furniture, filled the pantry and refrigerator with food. "When you come back, I want you to find a home, not an empty house full of painful memories," he explained. But I had already made a decision. "Robert, I want to sell the house." I told him one afternoon while I was being fed through a nasogastric tube because my stomach still couldn't tolerate solid food. "It has too many ghosts now. I want to start over somewhere else." My brother nodded understandingly. "Where would you like to live?" "With you," I replied. "If you'll have me, I want to go to Mexico City, start a new life far away from here, far from everything that happened." Robert smiled, his eyes filling with tears. "Nothing would make me happier, sister. My home is your home." That decision filled me with a peace I hadn't felt in months. It was the closure I needed. Frank tried to visit me in the hospital twice. Both times he was denied entry. I had given specific instructions that I didn't want to see him. He left letters for me at the front desk, which Robert collected but I didn't read. "Do you want me to read them to you?" my brother asked. "No," I replied firmly. "Maybe someday, But not now. In the 3rd week after that terrible day, I was discharged. I had gained 10 pounds. My vital signs had stabilized, and although I was still weak, the doctors were confident I would make a full recovery with time and proper care. Robert took me to my house one last time to pick up some personal belongings before we moved to Mexico. When I walked in, I barely recognized the place. The new furniture, the freshly painted walls, the framed photographs in places of honor. My brother had transformed the empty house back into a home. But I knew it wasn't my home anymore. My home was where I felt safe, valued, loved. And that place was now with Robert. I packed only the essentials: photographs of Richard, some memories of when Frank was a child and was still innocent, my nursing certificates, letters from grateful patients. I left behind everything that tied me to the pain. Henry took care of selling the house and setting up a trust to manage the money from the sale and the payments that Frank and Diane owed me. "You won't have to worry about a thing," he assured me. "I'll oversee everything and send you monthly reports." 3 months later, settled in Mexico City at Robert's house, I received news. The house had sold for $230,000. With that money and my recovered pension, I had financial security again. Frank and Diane had made their first payment of $1,500, although according to Henry, they made it just 1 day before the deadline. It will take them 6 years and 2 months to pay off the full debt if they keep up the payments, Henry informed me. And if they don't pay, I asked. Then I proceed with criminal charges, as the agreement states, slowly. I began to rebuild my life. I made new friends in Mexico, women my age who met in a book club Robert helped me find. I started therapy with a psychologist specializing in trauma and family abuse. The sessions were difficult, painful, but necessary. "What you experienced is called financial abuse and extreme neglect," the doctor explained to me during one session. "It is a form of violence just as real as physical violence, and it was not your fault." Those words freed me from the guilt I had been carrying. It hadn't been my fault. I had been the victim, not the one responsible. I gradually gained weight until I reached 128 pounds, a healthy weight for my age and height. My hair, which had started to fall out from malnutrition, grew back. The deep worry lines on my face softened. I started to smile again, to laugh, to live. A year after that terrible day when Robert knocked on my door and saved my life, I was sitting on the balcony of his apartment in Mexico City, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. The sun painted the sky in shades of coral and gold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Henry. "Frank has made 12 consecutive payments. Total paid so far, $18,000, $75,000 remaining." I read it without feeling anything in particular. Not satisfaction, not anger, not sadness. Just acceptance. Frank was paying his debt, literally and figuratively. In the message, there was also a note. "Frank is asking if he can write you a letter. He says he is in therapy and that part of his recovery process is to apologize properly." I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I replied, "He can send the letter. I'll read it when I'm ready." And I meant it. Someday, when my heart was completely healed, maybe I could read his words. Maybe I could even forgive him. But that day hadn't come yet, and that was okay. I had all the time in the world. Robert came out onto the balcony with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "What are you thinking about, sister?" he asked, sitting next to me. I smiled. "About how lucky I am to have you. About how grateful I am to be alive. About all the beautiful things I still have ahead of me." My brother hugged me. "And I'm grateful that you survived, that you are so strong." We sat there, watching the sun finish rising, painting a new day full of possibilities. I had lost a lot. Money, furniture, the relationship with my son, the innocence of believing that family love was unconditional. But I had gained something more valuable. I had found myself. I had discovered that I deserved respect, dignity, love, that I didn't have to accept abuse from anyone, not even my own blood. The morning breeze caressed my face, and I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time in over a year, I felt free, completely, wonderfully free.